Welcome to Legal Keys, unlocking time, revenue, and results. The podcast that connects you with the people, technologies, and trending topics shaping the modern legal landscape. From cutting-edge AI innovations to high-growth marketing strategies and everything in between. Legal Keys is your go-to resource for actionable insights. Brought to you by Faster Outcomes and hosted by Tim Sawyer, two-time Inc. 500 co-founder entrepreneur. We're here to help you navigate the tools and trends driving success in today's legal world.
Hello, welcome to our 9th episode of Legal Keys. Great to be here today. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We continue to get traction week after week, and so grateful for our listeners. For those of you who are joining us, returning guests, we thank you for your support. And for those of you joining us for the first time, we welcome and hope you enjoy today's episode. I have an incredible guest today. I've met her now a couple of times. Like me, she spends a lot of time traveling the country, speaking with law firms and lawyers of all shapes and sizes. Joining me today is Brooke Birkey, founder of Level Up Business Coaching, a legal operations expert who has seen it all, to say the least. From receptionist to marketing director, and now she helps law firms boost conversion and cut costs with smarter intake and operations. We want to dive into that today, Brooke, and then also we want to talk a little bit about some of the broader implications of AI. There's a lot of mixed feelings around the use of AI and not people becoming emotionally dependent on that certainly in the intake process. And so I want to welcome you today, Brooke. Appreciate you taking the time. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. It's so good to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So right into it, what's the number one thing you say, as I travel the country and my clients, what's the number one thing that you tend to lean into right away when you're looking at effective intake processes?
I have to have two number ones because they're both together. So empathy training and empathy coaching, and that doesn't just mean like, oh, I feel bad for the person. It means that you know when to hit the empathy cues. You know how to assess somebody's chief concern and use it in the sales process. You know how to identify the color type and then redirect them, right? So we have different color types, and anyone who's ever done intake like myself has seen this. We have the angry color type, the therapy color type, the anxious color type, the withholder, the one who only wants to speak to an attorney. So having that emotional intelligence training to be able to identify what kind of a color type is this, how do I meet their needs exactly where they're at and earn their trust? And what goes hand in hand with that is strong sales choreography. And so it's choreography just means that we have a roadmap from the beginning of the call to the end of the call. And we call that a conceptual script. So basically it's engineered to earn the caller's trust, know when to pivot into the sale and go ahead and close, for a PI attorney on a single call, or for a consultative firm, set that consult on the single call. Those are the goals. And so that actually has to be engineered.
It would seem to me that the intake process, and I love your take on the idea that it is a sales function. And I think all law firms listening to this, that's number one, is that, all the laws that apply to retail apply to intake 100%.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a sales process. And I think like any sales process, it starts with the hiring, right? Mm-hmm. You get involved in that, like what tips do you have for what to look for? And how do you gauge whether or not somebody's going to be successful in that role?
Yeah, so we do recruiting here at Level Up, and we have actually a 10-step vetting process to make sure that we catch any personality issues that might, be able to make it through maybe just one or two interviews. And so that's really the key is, it can be tempting to just want to hire on your gut or to rush the hiring process because you need somebody and you have that short-term kind of feeling of safety when somebody interviews well, but that doesn't mean anything, especially if it's just one good interview. It means absolutely nothing. People can mask who they are a lot longer these days. And so to anyone who's hiring out there, I would encourage you have a long vetting process and, bring somebody in who knows how to gauge emotional intelligence to kind of do an analysis on that person. So you can see, based on your data points, is this person going to make it for the long haul, or
Right.
are they just performing for me?
Yeah, and I would suspect the wrong hire can be expensive and take a while to recover from.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the SHRM organization is now saying that it's up to 90% of the salary to replace somebody once you factor in recruiting and training and opportunity costs and all of that. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is a lot of money. What's your take on so again, as I travel the country, there's a lot of folks now that offer um, remote recruiting, right? So in other words, people from different parts of the country. Are you seeing much of that in the intake process? Are law firms utilizing those remote employees for that? Either
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
or wherever.
Yeah, because it's not like you have to have a bar ticket or anything to work as an intake specialist, and so you can really recruit from all over the country.
Yeah,
And the firms that I work with that do recruiting nationwide get a lot more applicants, obviously.
yeah.
But I haven't seen any true data that says that they hire faster. It's just they tend to get a lot more applicants, which says something about the market out there right now. It's difficult, as everybody knows.
Is it so? A labor shortage is a real thing for intake type folks.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially in the legal industry, I've recently done some research indicating that the legal industry has gone away from recruiting, kind of shifted away and more towards internal development, just because it's so difficult to find quality people out there.
And what are the keys when you say internal development? What are they focusing on? One is obviously emotional intelligence, right? But talk about like what's the excellent training process post hire? Like what do you coach folks?
So I recommend they do an onboarding process that is a month long at least. And,
Okay,
and that just means that you should really wait for a full month to consider this person fully hired. That doesn't mean that you don't give them the paperwork or give them their forms to fill out or whatever, but it just means hedge and manage your expectations for at least a full month. And then of course the standard 3 months for before you get your benefits and things like that, that's still good. But I recommend continuing to test them for emotional intelligence, continue to put them in situations where their real personality can come out, continue to give them assessments and just look at them with eyes that you're not quite fully hired yet.
right.
So for all of our recruiting clients, we always recommend that they do a month-long onboarding process with us. And we have actually seen personality changes in that month of hiring. So, they went through the whole process
Yeah,
and they performed really well, and they got all the way through, and then their personality changed as soon as they got in the door. So we know that's a possibility with today's market, and that's why we advocate for that month of onboarding.
got it. And one of so if it's a sales process, right,
Mhm,
then
mhm.
then you're looking for a salesperson personality type,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah.
mentioned the different personality types there are. But then it's almost like an added level of complexity in that a good salesperson, right? You'll be they'll ask questions and listen and do all the things they need to do. Um,
Mhm,
but like a great closer, in my own experience of having run sales organizations for a long time, a great
mhm.
closer, they're not always the most empathetic folks, right? Not always, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So how do you thread that needle? Like, what's the coaching that you do in the intake process to say, hey, listen, these people they gotta sign their engagement letter, they gotta do this, but you gotta listen, right?
It's interesting. I don't actually require that they have strong empathy, natural wiring in order to be hired as a salesperson. And we test for that. There's a test called the Strength Finders, and it tests for empathy. And some people chart really high, and some people don't. But you have to be able to learn it. It's like muscle memory. Anything else that you learn, math when you were in the second grade, right? Even if you don't have an aptitude for it, you have to learn it. And
Right.
so our training requires them to hit those emotional intelligence cues. Like if somebody says, I was injured and I went to the hospital. The first thing out of your mouth better be, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, but I'm really glad that you called us. Let's see what we can do." Right. And you don't necessarily need to have a strong natural empathy skill set in order to hit empathy cues. You just have to be willing to follow the choreography, essentially.
Got it. And so when you think about, so a couple of things that I'm hearing. One is that it is difficult finding the right people to do this. And you have to have the right process in place. And then you obviously have to have the right technology. Um, and one of the clients that I work with, and I'm really curious to hear because you have feelings on this, right? Strong feelings either way. So as we talk about using the people, that's your piece you just discussed, right? Then it's the process, and then it's the technology, the tech enablement, right? So on the tech enablement side, I heard a really interesting story. So this large law firm doing 100, they've got 1,200 open matters at any one time, doing 150 to 200 demands a month.
Yeah.
They're now using AI to analyze call sentiment, right? So post person hung up and human doing it, right? And I know there's actually some law firms that are trying to go full bot, which I don't think the world's quite ready for that yet, meaning an AI agent doing everything.
Right.
So they've got the call analysis, call analysis post. In your coaching, do you do much of that? You're listening to the call post call and saying, okay, what happened here? And how do you square that with, okay, we did the call analysis and you can track that to, oh, that's the top producer and these are the elements that they include in every call. Like, what's your process to do that? I guess tech AI aside, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually have a rubric and it follows the structure of our sales choreography. So I can, so my clients that work with me during the intake training process and then after what we call our investment protection program, they get their calls reviewed every single week. And so, um, you know, I do it from a holistic perspective. So it follows the exact schematic of the script and all of the nuance, and I give them real-time feedback. Plus, I fill out the rubric so they can see all of that. So that's a training tool, right? I expect them to listen to it. I expect them to listen to it as a team. They can review it. They have a certain amount of points that they got on the rubric that, this is your score to beat. So that's a training tool. The AI aspect, I believe, is also a training tool. And so if you can gauge caller sentiment, I believe this is especially powerful for managers. So you can pull out the calls with the worst caller sentiment and then analyze and say, what went wrong here? But the key is to have somebody who is an expert in this area to be able to tell you really what went wrong here, rather than just saying, well, their tone changed here. What do you think went wrong? It's just a little bit of a stronger positioning to have it reviewed by somebody who knows exactly how these things work. But even if you don't have that, then it's a strong training tool especially from a management perspective, to be able to pull that out and then go back over it and for themselves pull out training opportunities and train the team members in where they think it went wrong. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And the other thing, as you're talking, I'm thinking, so there's some practices that are like some firms that are going full blown. We're going to use a freaking bot and it's going to do its thing. And not sure I'm on board with that. There's a lot of great applications for AI. I'm not, we'll see on that one. Clearly, there's some usage around that. What's the general sentiment amongst that employee group, right? So I was talking with my kids over the weekend about AI and all the cool things that I see happening with AI and some segments. One of the big changes that's happening right now, for example, is the ability to use AI to write code. So someone who used to be a junior developer, so they do MIT to get trained to become a junior developer and then become a senior developer. That's
No, not so much.
not so much because the code can write the code.
Yeah.
And so it's, I'm just wondering, like, when you're talking in circles among peers and friends, is there, that employee population concern that, like, hey, anytime someone mentions AI, they're like, I do that. Wait a second. Wait, you're going to take my job? Because we're not advocating that, but I'm just curious if those conversations are happening and the frequency of it.
I haven't heard very much employee sentiment around this is going to take my job because at this point, the number of firms who are really going full throttle AI are few.
Yeah.
And the general sentiment is it's not going to go that far. But with what we've seen in technology, I mean, I think it's both eyes wide open and considering the possibilities. And being careful about how I use AI because of some of the implications that can be with, like you said before, with dependency. So, for example, you don't want to teach your intake team members to be dependent on AI to identify tone, right? You want them to be able to do that themselves. And so the positioning is the human contact. In my opinion, should be first position, and then the training tools should assist with that. Rather than going full throttle into using AI. And that's for a few different reasons. There's some early science that indicates that that forming relationships with Mirage, like bots, is really hard on the human psyche. And so it's just to be careful about the adaptations.
Yeah, and to your point, there's the support stuff. There's wide level adoption around that, right? Typically, in personal injury, writing a demand letter is not, not a big lift for AI. Certainly, medical chronology, that type of stuff. And then there's some cool analytical tools for sure in AI, and research. Absolutely, we see a ton of that, particularly in family law. The use of that. So we're seeing positive green shoots everywhere. This stuff, that the intake stuff, that's the bleeding edge, right? That's the debate that's happening. It's like, and philosophically, me as a human and as the person responsible for head of sales of faster outcomes, strongly advocate that, to your point, AI is a tool. Just like you have your name a technology, whatever your tech stack is, they're all tools to help you go faster, right? So we're strongly recommending. And that, even in written documentation, if you think about AI, you get 85% right? So you still need someone to get you to closer to 100. And when you're talking about closing people, not sure that we're going to get there eventually, but we're not there yet. So so you've been doing this for a while now. What's a typical lift that you'll see? So you'll go into an organization and say, hey, these are the kind of the two parts. What are the most common mistakes that are in the intake process? What do you recommend to fix those proactively? And then what type of lift can people expect when they get that process right?
Yeah, so the most common mistakes are the empathy cues and the sales choreography, but the solution is actually very simple. And I think we kind of overcomplicate intake sometimes, and make it a little bit more complex than it really is. It's teaching people emotional intelligence. So, in our training programs, we spend a lot of time on the 4 quadrants of how people present themselves and how to identify what they're really looking for. And, we always say we don't want to analyze them to manipulate them. We want to wear a white hat and meet their needs exactly where they're at. Right.
Yeah.
And then teaching the sales choreography and then just reinforcing it. So it's just like trying to learn anything new, like when you were in school. It's just reinforcing it with role play, call review, and it takes time because we have these neural pathways in our brain that are used to doing other things, right? We have been doing things a certain way for our entire careers in some points. Maybe that's even 20 years of customer service experience. And now I'm telling you, no, when your brain wants to go right, you actually have to go left. And
Right.
so patience in showing them the choreography, and then just gently reinforcing it and teaching them how to, pivot and things like that. It's really quite simple, but if you're doing it yourself, you have to have the time and the patience and also the emotional intelligence toward your own team members to, what are their learning styles? How do they pick up on things? How can you tell what they're struggling with? Things like that. Because even if you just show it to them a couple of times, they're not going to get it. You have to allow time for longer term spatial learning in that. And then
let me interrupt you. So what would be a good closing rate if they got 100 phone calls and they're doing a really good job? What percentage of those cases, and allowing for some of those cases you don't want, right? Because they're not great cases. So for cases that you want, and I've seen tools that measure this, for the cases that you want, what if you said you should be at this rate for a closing rate, what would that be?
Our qualified conversion rate for a PI firm is, or our goals are always between 85 and 95. And that comes after training. So that's the 3 months of training and the investment protection program. Sometimes firms can get up there pretty quickly, even during the initial training period. And then some take maybe a year to get there.
Wow.
But that's generally our qualified conversion rate goals is between 85 and 95%.
That's high. That seems high.
It's high, but we've seen it. Yeah, absolutely.
Good for you.
Yep.
Right. And then as we start to wind down here, I'm curious too, because if you look at all the different size law firms that are out there, right? So you have like these super industrial, 150, 200, 500 demands a month, right? That's a different animal.
Mm-hmm.
Do you come across a lot of times in these small law firms, the person that's doing intake does other things, right? So that's got to feel like a very different process, right? So if I have someone who's just on their phone all day with a headset going, they can get, if you do something 1,000 times outside of getting worn down, you get really good at it, right? But if, okay, a third of my day is intake and then a third of my day is, payroll or whatever else. Do you see that a lot? And how do you handle that differently?
Yeah, so we do sort of a systems analysis with every training program, and we ask, what are your team members doing? What are their responsibilities? Can they close on their own? What's the CRM? And if we find that somebody is also doing like an intake specialist is also doing legal work, that's an automatic recommendation to shut off the legal work and only do intake. Maybe marketing as well. So marketing and intake pair very well together because they're two sides of the same spectrum. The one's over here, but they're the same part of the brain. But intake and legal work are very different. So legal work is very linear, left-brained, process-oriented. Intake is very prospecting, pivot, flexible. And so those two things just don't go well together. And so I recommend any of you who have your intake specialist also doing legal work, shift that so that they can help you with marketing instead to get the most out of them. But if that's not possible, then we train them to shift their energy. We give them tools to shift when a call comes in, because it can be kind of like a whiplash. If you're knee deep in medical records, and wouldn't have that problem if they're using you, right? That would be good. So knee deep in medical records, and they're high concentration or research or anything like that, and then someone calls and it's just jarring interruption, and then you have to switch on customer service mode. It's very difficult. So we teach them the 3-ring rule, which is basically ring 1, put everything aside. Ring 2, put a big old goofy smile on your face. And then ring 3, pick up with intention.
That's really smart, because what happens, and you can sense this, right? In any professional services organization, from accounting to whatever, right? That you can tell that when that person answers the phone, that they were just doing something that was totally, you could hear it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you know what their reaction is? They're in the middle of a project, and this drives me crazy as someone running sales organizations, and it's like, oh shit, another interruption.
Yep.
And it's a customer.
Yep.
It's no, you don't have to get that phone. You get to get that phone. That's the money. And that's the hardest transition, right? Like if you're, like you said, knee deep in a file and you got to go turn your brain off
Mm-hmm.
super hard. And I, that's more often than not in the law firms, the small law firms that we interact with, the person's, because we're talking about using our tools. And so you create the demands? Yep. You also do intake? Yep. You also do the research? Yep. And you go, okay, they tend to be less volume, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can see that as being challenging. I think what you're doing is amazing though. I really do. And so now we got to make sure that everybody gets their red meat from this podcast today, right? And they're like, okay, first of all, Brooke's amazing. How would I hire? Where can people find you? That's number one, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. I hope you'll reach out to me. Anyone who's listening, I do recruiting, intake, and client management, emotional intelligence training. It's Brooke, Brooke, at leveluplawfirmcoaching.com. It's a mouthful.
Got it. And if you want to get anyone listening, you want to get to 85 to 90% closing rate on the cases you want, which sounds to me like a pretty good goal. That's pretty aspirational, and she can help you get there. And then, as the three takeaways, if you say, okay, as you're thinking about your intake process, just keep these three things in mind, right? Whether they call you or not. What are the three takeaways you want to leave our audience with today?
Have a sales choreography in place. Teach your team to respond to empathy cues. So whatever that looks like, that's really important. And give your team opportunities to have real feedback. So like listening to their own calls and discussing them with you. That is a shortcut along with role playing to really accelerating improvement, because they can hear themselves and they go, oh, I don't want to sound like that again. Let me fix that.
Yeah. And lastly, how important is leadership when you engage, right? So if someone says, okay, we're going to hire Brooke, do you see a different result when they're like, just take care of this, Brooke, and then the guy or gal goes back to what they're doing, versus a super engaged leader who with process buy-in? How do you handle much of that? Because it would seem to me that's a pretty important element, right?
It makes all the difference. So the firms that get to that 87, 89, 92, 95% conversion rate are the ones that take what I give them. And, we still work together through call review, but they're doing things every single day to implement the coaching that I provided the team, the coaching that I provided to leadership during their training. They have taken that and made it into their own system. So those are the most successful firms and the ones that keep their conversion rates the highest, the longest. So that would be, creating an internal system, and of course, continuing to work with me or someone like me to do call review and feedback, so that they can keep growing beyond their current level of intake knowledge.
Yeah. Sounds like you've got a good handle on it, and you can't overstate the importance of this, right? It's literally the most important thing a law firm does is they spend so much money on advertising, they spend so much time, energy, effort to attract clients, and then the phone rings. We got to be perfect. Like, we got to be freaking perfect, and if we're not, we got to fix it. And I think anybody who's struggling with that and not hitting those numbers, that 85 to 95, absolutely strongly recommend they reach out to you. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
I'm like half of an intake expert now after hanging around with you. And whatever brain damage you suffered from answering my questions today, you'll stabilize in about 10 minutes.
I'll have a cup of coffee. I'll be fine. Yeah.
I really appreciate it. So we want to thank Brooke for taking the time today. Hopefully this was beneficial and everyone got something out of it. We want to thank everybody for joining us on Legal Keys, sponsored by FastRoute. It's the ultimate AI-powered legal intelligence platform for law firms of all shapes and sizes. I want to say thank you again, everyone. Enjoy your week.